And tonight, our message is the gut-brain connection specifically. We're going to talk more about it tomorrow night, but tonight we've already talked about it on multiple occasions, but I want to delve into kind of some of the nuts and bolts of the gut-brain connection. Once again, for those of you who are interested, our YouTube channel is called Health and Homestead. Health and Homestead. So that's how you spell it if you have any interest in checking out our YouTube channel. But let's delve into the message tonight. Speaking of the gut-brain connection, what impacts the gut can also impact the brain. And the first place, this is something that is, well, I should say this. Recently, you've seen study after study after study coming out on the gut-brain connection. But the first place that I know of in history that talks about the gut-brain connection is the Bible. It's the Bible. We see in Lamentations chapter 1 and verse 20, it says, "Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress, my bowels are troubled." My bowels are troubled. Interesting, they notice this connection in the scriptures. We see the same thing in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 19. My bowels, I am pained at my very heart. My emotions, they notice this connection. Now we're going to delve more into this later in the message, that the Bible is the first place that I know of that talks about this, and people might have thought these were kind of strange concepts until just the last several years when we've seen study after study come out on this subject. And there's a book called Counsels on Diet and Foods, and it says something very, very strange there. This sounded crazy, and now I'm going to share you the research that may show you, that's not so crazy. It's actually just before its time. It says, the abuses of the stomach by the gratification of appetite are a fruitful source of most church trials. You say, what a strange thought. But let's delve into the research. Scientists have discovered that a high-fat diet leads to depressive, anxious symptoms in mice, and it also promotes inflammation. I think this is the only animal study we'll look at tonight, and all the rest should be human studies. But notice this. They took rodents and they put them on two different diets. One group was on a high-fat diet. The other group was on a standard fat diet. And they began to notice that the high-fat diet group began to exhibit negative characteristics like impaired memory, repetitive behaviors, which they often associate with depression, anxiety, and inflammation. Then what they did was, they didn't see these same problems in the regular fat diet mice. So they took bacteria out of the intestines of the high-fat diet group, and they put that bacteria, those microbes, into the intestines of the standard fat diet group. And what happened? When they put the bacteria from the high-fat diet group in the regular fat diet group, the regular fat diet group began to exhibit anxiety, impaired memory, repetitive behaviors, and inflammation. These are the very same problems that the other group was having. Now, this begins to give some evidence that just maybe the bacteria in our intestines could be impacting our emotions, our inflammation, potentially even our mental health. We were told in a book called Child Guidance, eating too frequently and of rich, unwholesome food destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. And I want to share one, let me see if I have the other quote. Yes. Listen to this quote also. It says, "It cannot be too often repeated that whatever is taken into the stomach affects not only the body, but also the mind as well. It is difficult and often well-nigh impossible for one who is intemperate in diet to exercise patience and self-control." We're going to look at more research on this, but before we do, this principle found in Child Guidance actually comes from the Bible, where intemperance can make it hard to have self-control. We see this in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. It's this stepping stone of faith. Add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance. And notice what comes after temperance: patience. When we're intemperate in our lifestyle, it can be harder to have patience. I'll give you an example. Let's say you, for a few nights, you go to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, and then you have to wake up at 7. So that's kind of intemperate with your sleep. Is it going to be as easy to be patient with your wife or your husband or your children? No, it's going to be harder. So before patience comes temperance. Well, there's a journal in the United States, a periodical rather, called the Scientific American. And it reports on how scientists are calling the gut, our intestines, the stomach area, the second brain. They state that gastrointestinal issues can sour people's moods. That word sour, that's very interesting. That gastrointestinal troubles can sour our moods, and they're calling the gut the second brain. Now, I want you to notice this quote also from that book, Counsel in Diet and Foods. It told us this long before the research came out. It said people who have a sour stomach are very often of a sour disposition, meaning they have an unhappy emotional state. Now, this is well over 100 years before any research on this came out. Everything seems to be contrary to them, and they are inclined to be peevish and irritable. That word peevish, if you asked your average American, what does peevish mean? They don't really know what that word is. It's an old word. But what the word peevish means is to become easily irritated, especially by unimportant things. Have you ever been that way? Maybe issues, they're not even serious issues, but you just get annoyed. Or maybe not you, but you've seen somebody like that. Maybe it was a mom or a dad or a wife or a husband or a coworker or a child. They get easily irritated, especially by unimportant things. That's peevishness. And now it says at the end there, it says, if we would have peace among ourselves, we should give more thought than we do to having a peaceful stomach. What is this talking about? We're going to delve more into the research. Scientists have discovered that about 2/3 of our immune function is found in our gut, found in our intestines. Okay, so this is important. We talked about, do you remember how babies are introduced into from the good bacteria from their mother as they go through the birth canal, right? So what they have found is that toddlers, those are children age, I don't know, what, around 2 years old or something like that, very, very small children, they have found from Ohio State University, they looked at bacterial diversity in the intestines of toddlers and their potential impact on their character. And they found that toddlers with greater diversity of gut bacteria were more social and happier. They also found that boys had greater extroversion with greater diversity of flora or bacteria. And the opposite was also true, that these little children that didn't have as much bacteria in their intestines, they ended up having more what we call tantrums. That's getting angry and crying. They were more unhappy. They were less social. So they found a similar thing on infants. There's a common problem with infants where they're crying and they're troubled all the time. In English, we call it colic. Colic. And what they found is the same thing, that babies that have colic have less diversity of gut bacteria. So you say, okay, that's babies, that's toddlers. What about adults? We're going to come back to the adults in just a little bit. But before we do, I want to ask the question, if you want a good diversity, a good ratio of good bacteria in your gut, what should you do? Now, if you were watching the internet, they'd probably tell you go buy some pills. But I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you something which is much better than buying pills. So it has to do with this research from the journal Frontiers in Nutrition reveals that plant-based diets enhance microbial diversity, bacterial diversity in the gut, which may have a multitude of benefits. So eating a plant-based diet, now why may that work? For instance, if you look at an apple, just a simple apple, an apple, researchers tell us, has about 100 million bacteria in and on the apple. So you might be thinking, okay, then I'll never eat an apple again. But no, actually the apple is good for you, and the bacteria that they have is generally beneficial for you. Secondarily, when you eat the apple has two things. It not only has the bacteria that you need to give diversity to your gut, it also secondarily has fiber. You may have heard you cannot digest fiber. That's true. But there's something in you that can digest fiber, and that is the bacteria in your intestines. So when you eat an apple or a pear or a plum or any fruit or vegetable, you have generally the bacteria there and the fiber that the bacteria needs to eat. So as you break it down in your intestines, now your bacteria has fiber to eat, and as it eats that fiber, as it metabolizes it, it gives a byproduct. And the byproduct is something called short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids lower levels of inflammation in the body. And often when people are depressed, they're in an inflammatory state. So eating a greater diversity, if you only eat apples, you'll only get the bacterial diversity of an apple. And we call the diversity of bacteria in and on our body our microbiome. Our microbiome. And if you want to add to the diversity, what do you need to do? Eat a greater diversity of plant foods. So if you only eat apples, you only get their diversity. But then if you add to your diet pears and bananas and plums and peaches and lettuce and kale, you get the idea. You get grapes have a very distinct and different diversity also. And you seem to have a lot. We just went to a grocery store. Was it Migros or something like that? Tons of different grapes. I mean, just tons of different grapes. I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. I'd never seen so many different varieties of grapes, and so that was wonderful. But nevertheless, now, if you didn't have all the science we've just talked about, you could guess from the book of Genesis that these foods would actually be beneficial to your health and happiness. Why? What did God give Adam and Eve in the very beginning? Genesis 1:29 says, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for food." And so in the Garden of Eden, the name Eden in the Hebrew language means pleasure. Pleasure. So you would expect that whatever God gave Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden would be best designed for their pleasure, for their happiness. So you'd expect that the food he gave them would also then make us happy, right? And I want to go a little further in this, talking about neurotransmitters. These are brain, we can make it very simple, brain chemicals. And research reported in the journal, the Bulgarian Journal of Plant Physiology, reveals that animal neurotransmitters are found in plants, meaning the neurotransmitters that humans need, like serotonin, melatonin, and these kind of things are inside plant foods. It's in the food that we were designed to eat. So these chemicals that we need for our brains, we can get by eating a diversity of plant foods. Well, I want to talk about alcoholism and lacking gut bacteria. Now, I used to drink myself to sleep at night with alcohol before giving my life to the Lord. And you know, this is a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it revealed an imbalance of gut bacteria in certain alcoholics. This was a small study of 60 alcoholics, and 24 of them had lower levels of bacteria in their guts. So the ones that had lower levels of bacteria, just take a guess, do you think the ones with lower levels of bacteria found it easier or harder to overcome the alcohol? What would you guess? I hear you say harder, and let's see what the research says. After 19 days alcohol-free, those with lower levels of bacteria had higher levels of anxious feeling, depression, and desire for alcohol. So you're exactly right. You guessed right. And the 36 participants with better gut bacteria, better gut flora, were doing better. Now, I was sharing this research with a friend of ours. We have a friend from California who has struggled for years with addiction. My wife and I, for years, have put on seminars teaching people about how to overcome addiction, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, and we've done seminars on that for many years. And we had a friend from California who had struggled with drugs, and specifically one of the worst drugs on planet Earth called methamphetamine. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible drug. And he said something fascinating to me. He said, all drug addicts have something in common. And I was wondering, what is it? And he said, all drug addicts have a terrible diet. And when he said that to me, I was like, whoa. When I was living as an addict, I had a horrible, horrible diet. It was terrible. I basically ate junk food, refined food, and meat and cheese. That's basically, like white bread, meat and cheese, and junk food. Sugar. I never had a salad in my entire life. I think maybe I mentioned it here or somewhere else. I never had a salad once. I had never had lettuce ever in my entire life, ever, as an adult. And you think, how could that possibly be true? My parents didn't make me eat anything healthy if I didn't want to. They didn't even encourage me to, really. It wasn't really a thing in our house. And so I was very prone to addiction. And people who eat that way are very prone to addictions. And then as my lifestyle changed, and I'll share more about it tomorrow, about a health food, people call it a health food, that can make you angry, addicted, cause depression, and maybe even ruin your marriage or cause problems in your house. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. But as I changed my diet, for the first time in my life, I felt like I thought, man, now I feel like what maybe a normal human who's not an addict feels like. So diet can actually change people's lives, and we'll talk more about that. Now, who would have ever guessed that changing people's diets could help them overcome addiction? Well, guess what? We were told this over 100 years ago in the book Counsels in Diet and Foods. In our medical institutions, clear instruction should be given in regard to temperance. The patients should be shown the evil of intoxicating liquor and the blessing of total abstinence, or getting rid of it. They should be asked to discard or let go of the things that have ruined their health, and the place of these things, or in place of these things, should be supplied with an abundance of fruit. Oranges, lemons, prunes, peaches, and many other varieties can be obtained, for the Lord's world is productive if painstaking effort is put forth. So what are we told? We're told that wouldn't it be good if you have people who are addicted and you help change their diet, help them eat a diversity of plant foods, and it will help them fight their addiction. And this fits exactly with what the research shows. Fruits, vegetables, these things are phenomenal for you. Now, going even further, this is a study from Australia, and the title of this study is, they share that fruit is a depression buster for women, meaning women that consume more fruit are less depressed. But by the way, it works for men also. And this study right here, or rather this entry in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry of Clinical Neuroscience, the title of this study is Depression and Fruit Treatment. Depression and fruit treatment. I'll read a little bit. Sorry, it's so tiny. Depression is a common mood disorder affecting sleep, appetite, and libido, and is also one of the manifestations of dementia and may lead to suicide attempts, particularly with violent methods. But then it goes on to say, research has shown the involvement of different neurotransmitters like serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine in depression. Serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan in depression. Now, then they tell us, okay, what could we do about it? And you're thinking, maybe they're going to say you need to take a pill. But that's not what they say. You probably can't read it, but it says up here, there are some high-content sources of serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan, which can provide the body with these substances. What foods are those? These include plantains, pineapples, bananas, kiwis, plums, and tomatoes for serotonin. So certain things like bananas and tomatoes and kiwis and pineapple. Let me ask you a question. Does anybody like any of those foods? Do you enjoy any of the foods that we just read? Anybody? Okay, probably most of us. So notice the foods that we need to eat to make us happier. It's not like some bitter root that nobody likes. Like if you want to be happy, you need to eat this food. You're not going to like it, you're going to hate it, but it's going to make you happier. No, it's not like that. It's the food that you're like, man, this is just wonderful. That food was designed by God to make you happier. Often people think, if you're going to be healthy, you got to eat food that nobody likes. But that's not actually the case. I actually don't believe that. I believe in a loving God that not only made things to make us healthy, but things that we would enjoy and make us healthy and happy and enjoy it simultaneously. This is the God that we serve. And is there happiness in fruits and vegetables? Well, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I want to share with you two more studies. This is a study in the British Journal of Health Psychology. And the title of the study is, Many Apples a Day Keep the Blues Away. And you may think, oh no, I have to eat many apples every day? That's actually not what the study was saying. They were playing on that saying. Do you have the saying even in French, an apple a day keeps the doctor away? Okay, yeah, that's kind of all over, right? And they're doing a play on that saying and saying many apples a day keep depression away, right? They make you happier. But the point of the study was not that you have to eat many apples. It was that the more servings of fruits and vegetables that you eat in a day make you significantly happier. Now, the study was replicated here in an American journal, and this over here, from bottom to top, is how happy you are. That's how happy you are. The higher it goes, the happier you get. From left to right is how many servings of fruits and vegetables that you eat per day. What they found is, if you ate 0, you were statistically the least happy. If you ate 1, didn't make much of a difference, tiny bit. But as you continued to eat more servings of fruits or vegetables in a day, you became significantly happier. What was also interesting, do you have a question?
Yes, so what I'm worried about is fructose in fruit. And fructose, I've heard that it's even worse than glucose. So I'm kind of worried of having to figure out how to proportion the fruits, the amount of fruits we consume.
Yes, good question, good question. And I know because we get the same YouTube videos in America about the dangers of fructose. Don't eat fruit. It's bad for you. It'll make you fat and it will ruin your health. Then do another search and look at fruitarians. They are the thinnest human beings in the world. They are super fit and they don't have diabetes. They look fantastic. I'll give you an example. There are 2 men who are type 1 diabetics. And one of them's named Cyrus Kambata, and the other one is named Robbie Barbaro or something like that. They have a channel, and they've written a New York Times best-selling book called Mastering Diabetes. Mastering Diabetes. These guys, they believe, just like what's being taught all over the internet, avoid carbohydrate-rich foods, especially for blood sugar, especially for diabetics, even more so for type 1 diabetics. And so they went and they avoided carbohydrates, like is suggested, and their blood sugar got worse and worse and worse, and they couldn't control their blood sugar. Then they heard this man saying he was helping people with their blood sugar by eating tons of fruit. The exact opposite of what they had taught and what many people teach on YouTube. There's a very popular doctor who tells people fructose is worse. And don't get me wrong, refined sugar is a horrible thing. High fructose corn syrup, I don't even think you get it as much in the United States. I think they put actual sugar in some of your food. In the United States, we use high fructose corn syrup. But what's interesting is, so these guys go on a high fruit diet, massive amounts of fruit, and their blood sugars start getting better and better and better and better. And they're able to take less insulin. They're type 1, they have to inject insulin. They're able to take less insulin and eat way more carbohydrates. Their energy goes up. They start feeling fantastic. They're happy. And so you do not have to eat small quantities. This is common though, so that's not surprising that you asked. It's actually a good question, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because I can see the guy's face. His name is slipping me is evading me right now. But there's a popular doctor. What's that? Okay, no, it's a different one. That's not the one I'm thinking of. It's a guy. But I'm sure he says the same thing. It's very common. And what you will find is, and I could go into much more research on it. For instance, dates. Do you know what date fruit is? What's the word in French for dates? There you go. And so, looking at dates are 80% sugar by weight. That's a lot of sugar. Frosting on a cake is like 70% sugar. Dates have more sugar per gram than frosting on a cake. So you think, okay, then they have to be worse, right? So they did a study where they took diabetics and non-diabetics, and they gave them 7 to 10 dates at a meal. Is 10 dates quite a bit? Yeah, it's quite a few dates. And they tried it with the non-diabetics, and it did not cause a blood sugar spike. So then they gave 7 to 10 dates to diabetics, type 2 diabetics, and it did not cause blood sugar problems in them either. So the question is why? Because the date is packed, it's a high fiber food. And fiber, what it does is, it's the structure of this plant, and what it does is it slowly releases the glucose. It slowly releases the sugar, so it gives you energy, but not a spike in blood sugar. It gives you a good amount of blood sugar at a time without the spike that would come with it, because it's packaged in the package that the Creator made it in, that the Creator gave it to us in. And God didn't make a mistake, right? So, this is interesting. How many per week? Actually, we're going to look at this here. This is the University of California, San Diego, reports on the largest human study on the microbiome. It turns out that people who consume more than 30 different plants per week have the greatest diversity of bacteria in their guts compared with those who ate less than 10 different plants. Now, I don't know how it is here, because we bought salad in the store, like greens, salad greens. At least in the United States, I don't know how many they put in a box or a bag, but we've bought these boxes of like pre-made greens in grocery stores in the United States, and then it has a list of what's in it, and we've read, and one time there was like 13 or 14 different varieties of greens in that one box. So you might think 30 plants a week, that's crazy. But in actuality, it's not as much as you think it is, because, you know, if you have 5 different plants for breakfast and another 5 different ones for lunch, you're already at 10. You're already a third of the way to having as many different plants as you need in a week. So it sounds kind of crazy, but it's really not actually that difficult. And they help you because each one has different bacteria to help add bacteria to your microbiome. Now, here's a word we don't use a lot even in the English languages. Doctors might, but your average person would not probably even know what dyspeptic is or a dyspepsia. Dyspepsia or dyspeptic is having indigestion, stomach trouble, and then irritability or depression as a result of it. That's what dyspeptic or dyspepsia is. And we were told in Councils on Diet and Foods, for a dyspeptic stomach, you may place upon your tables fruits of different kinds, but not too many at one meal. So you don't want to have, 15 different things at a meal. It's actually better to have a few things here, a few things at the next meal, and slowly diversify throughout the week. And we're also told it would be well for us to do less cooking and eat more fruit in its natural state. Let us eat freely of fresh grapes and apples, peaches, oranges, blackberries, and all other kinds of fruit which can be obtained. And, it's interesting. I mean, if you live right in the city, you probably don't see a lot of fruit trees. But if you live outside of the city, as I'm driving around, you'll drive around and you'll see apple trees with apples still sitting there. And you may be even able to ask, because most people who own apple trees, unless they grow them for sale, most people just let them rot. And you can sometimes just ask them, say, hey, are you going to eat those apples on the tree? And they'll say, oh no, there's all, bugs bite them or whatever, and they're not perfect looking like in the store. But guess what? They'll generally taste way better than the ones at the store. You can cut away the little parts the bugs have eaten. And you cut it and they just taste amazing. So you could get them free many times if you do that. You could try anyway. But you want to ask. I'm not telling you to go steal people's fruit. I'm not talking about that. So I want to talk about the oldest scientific study in recorded history. What is it? This right here is from a scientific journal called Perspectives in Clinical Research. And they looked back through history to try to find the oldest study they could find, and this is the conclusion that they came to. 562 years before Christ, the world's first clinical trial is recorded in the book of Daniel in the Bible. Isn't that interesting? The world's first clinical trial is recorded in the book of Daniel in the Bible. Well, what is that study? It's in Daniel chapter 1 specifically. You may remember, maybe you've heard of the study before, the story. Daniel was taken captive. He lived in what we would call today Iraq. But he got taken to Iraq. He was originally in Israel, but he was taken as a captive from Israel and brought over to Iraq, which was called Babylon, the capital of Babylon. And while there, he was forced to go through a 3-year kind of university-type experience because he was one of the educated of the Jewish people. So he goes through the schooling, and while he's there, they wanted to give him the best food, the food of the king, which would be the best meat of the kingdom. So most people would go, this is wonderful, I'm so glad to have this. But Daniel and his friends decided, no, we're not going to do that. They decided, we're going to just eat plants for this time period. And in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it says, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he would not defile himself. So what did they do? It says in Daniel 1, verse 12, here's the first study in all of recorded history that we know of. Test your servants. Here's the test. Here's the study. Test your servants for 10 days and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. What is pulse? Pulse are things that are grown from seeds. So Daniel and his friends go on a plant-based diet. They're the experimental group. The control group were the Babylonian students who continued on a meat-based diet. And what ends up happening, at the end of this time, it says in verse 20, and in all matter of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. So notice, it enhanced the cognition. It enhanced their mental capacity by what they ate. Now, I'm going to show you a video clip from a documentary that my wife and I produced called Ancient Health. The first man in the video is going to be, he was one of the top doctors in the United States by the name of, John McDougall. Thank you.
But the main thing that folks should be concerned about is how long you live and how likely are you to get disease. And there have been 3 major studies published on this subject, big meta-analyses. And these meta-analyses, and only 3 big ones have been published, they show consistently that low-carb diets, in other words, low-plant food diets, high animal food diets, consistently they show that they're associated with more heart disease and more death, more mortality.
If you look around the world and you look at these people in the blue zones, the average percentage of calories from carbs ranges from about 50% to about 80%. Carbs are not the enemy, refined carbs are the enemy.
There have been a number of recent studies. Dr. Beeshold out of Phoenix, Arizona. First, she did an observational study showing that plant-based diet actually significantly improves your depression and anxiety stress score. It's called a DASS score.
So the mood actually is improved when you get the right amount of carbohydrates, but also the right type of carbohydrates and less protein.
Then she followed up with an interventional study, and that's where she took people who are not on a plant-based diet and put them on a plant-based diet for 2 weeks. She also put them on a plant-based diet plus fish for 2 weeks to see which one would be superior. And it turned out the fish diet wasn't any more superior than the carnivore diet. But the plant-based diet, significant dramatic changes, statistically significant changes in just 2 weeks in their mental ability.
We see when people go on this diet and drink plenty of water, get plenty of rest, follow these natural remedies, that it's just like something snaps in their brain, and it doesn't take like weeks or months.
Plant-based diet is key in our program for depression and anxiety recovery. The results are outstanding because it's a comprehensive approach, not just diet. We also utilize exercise, and we're utilizing correct thoughts and a lot of different modalities. But the diet is a key element.
I went on a plant-based diet about 5 weeks ago.
It's amazing because even if they had not told me he had the diet change, the first thing I noticed was he was bringing his schoolwork in.
And my teacher has actually been bragging on how much better I've been behaving since I've been on the diet.
In class, he wasn't getting as distracted, that he was paying attention, he was able to listen more closely, he was being alert, his discernment was better, he was more diligent, everything.
I can pay attention more. My mind is more clear since I've been on the diet.
It's just a huge improvement. And I also noticed he lost a lot of weight. But the main things I noticed was behavioral.
A study in a middle school has showed clearly that switching the menu from animal source to plant source diet almost eliminated absenteeism, increased and enhanced attention and homework performance and performance at school. It almost eliminated acts of violence as well as teen pregnancies.
And so they just feel better. Everywhere the blood flows, everywhere that perfect circulation goes, they feel better. Not just in body, but in mind. Clears up their thoughts even.
And every single day since I've been on a plant-based diet, the clarity continues to increase and my face continues to look younger, and my body feels like I look more vibrant. I've looked at pictures of myself before and after, and I look 5 years older, even just 10 months ago, than I do now.
What we eat does get turned into neurotransmitters. It actually helps us or hurts us, depending on what we're eating in regards to our brain chemistry. And it plays a vital role in health of the brain.
They'll say within 3 or 4 days, they seem to have clarity. They're alert. They listen in class better. They absorb more, and they do better on their tests.
The fog has been lifted out of my head. I think clearer. I've got better ideas, I believe. I can put 2 and 2 together faster, and just in general, I'm happier.
In fact, diet alone, studies show that diet alone will reduce your depression and anxiety scores by half just by dramatically changing your diet to a plant-based. And so that's significant. Now, we go for more than just half, and so that's why we have a whole program that includes more than this. But just the diet alone will make a big difference.
You don't have to choose between high-quality living and longevity. It's the same program. The same New Start approach to living helps you live longer, and it helps you live better.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? That they've tested something similar in the United States. They took a school, and they didn't mention it, but this school was a school for young people that you would call, what would be a name for them? Troubled young people. It was a school for troubled young people in America, and they changed their diet. And what ended up happening is, after they changed their diet to a healthier diet, away from the American junk food diet, these young people began to do better in their homework. They did better in their classwork. It almost eliminated fighting. It changed the lives of these young people. And it was similar to what we see with Daniel and his friends, that what we eat impacts our mental health. This is what we call, this is the first study, Daniel chapter 1, on the gut-brain connection. But I want to share with you a bit of my personal experience. My wife and I lived over in Iceland. And while we were there, we got stomach trouble. So did our friend our friend working with us from the States. We all got stomach trouble. And there was depression that followed, but I never made the connection that the depression was from my gut issues. And once again, not everybody's depression is from intestinal issues. But researchers have noticed that people with irritable bowel syndrome, that's just troubled stomach, they're very prone to depression. Multiple gut issues are associated with depression. People come down with intestinal problems, they come down with depression. It's very common. Not all of them, but it's very common. And so I went through this. And I had this trouble with my intestines for 11 years, and I had 11 years of depression. Now, some of the time it was seasonal, but it would often be worse in the winter. And then toward the end of it, I took some antibiotics because I had a tick bite, the little bug bite, and it can cause Lyme disease. So I took some antibiotics to avoid Lyme disease, and then I went down with full year-round depression. And I didn't make the connection until later. But research has come out and it showed that every time someone takes a round of antibiotics, it increases their rates of depression, their chances of being depressed, by about 25%. And every 2 to 5 rounds increases your chances of depression by about 50%. And so, why would that be? Why would people, after taking antibiotics, be more likely to be depressed? What are antibiotics killing? Bacteria. This makes sense. People with less bacteria would be more prone to having depression, anxiety, antisocial behavior, these kinds of things. And so I had this. The last 2 years, I got bit by a tick twice each year, took antibiotics, continued solid. My worst depression was after that. Then I changed my diet. And within 2 weeks, the depression went away. What did I do? What was the dietary change for me? It was similar because I saw a quotation similar to this one, where we're told in Counsels in Diet and Foods, in many cases of sickness, the very best remedy is for the patient to fast, that means to not eat, for a meal or 2. Now, I'll break it down real quick. If you're used to eating 3 meals a day and you skip 2 meals one time, you would fast for almost 24 hours. If you're used to eating 2 meals a day and you skip 1 meal, you would fast for almost 24 hours. So the point isn't to always do that, just one time to let the intestines rest. That the overworked, it says, I'll show you where I am now. Where am I? There we go. That the overworked organs of digestion may have an opportunity to rest. A fruit diet for a few days has often brought great relief to brain workers. Many times a short period of entire avoidance of food or abstinence from food followed by simple moderate eating has led to recovery through nature's own healing effort or recuperative effort. An abstemious or a simple diet for a month or two would convince many sufferers that the path of self-denial is the path to health. So I tried this. I went on a temporary fruit diet. And I don't mean everybody should go on a fruit diet as long as I did. I did it for 2 weeks, and my depression went away. And I'll share with you, during those 2 weeks, I was avoiding one food that's called a health food. I'll share with you tomorrow, and I actually think that's one of the main reasons my depression went away. It's a very common food in society today, and everybody says it's good for you, but we're going to look at the actual research on its potential dangers. Now, yes, but in this fruit, you have all these antioxidants, all the vitamins and minerals. It's very easy to digest. So it gave the intestines time to heal. It gave my intestines time to heal. So I want to break down this quote for a moment, how to help balance somebody's gut. Number one, a temporary fast. That could be skipping just 1 or 2 meals and letting your intestines rest. Number two, eat more whole fruits. And when I say whole, you don't have to eat the seed or something like that in a mango. I'm just talking about, you take the skin off and you eat the mango. But I'm talking about eating the mango and not mainly the juice. That's what we're talking about, or refining. But the whole food is what we're saying. Now, some people will say, but what about diabetes? And here's the research on it from the British Medical Journal. Anything here under the line, this black line, is lowering your chances. This is a study of over 100,000 people. Anything under this line is lowering your chances of getting type 2 diabetes. So strawberries, for most people, will lower their risk of diabetes. Oranges will lower your risk more. Peaches, plums, and apricots, more. Grapefruit, more. Bananas, more. Apples, pears, more. Prunes, more. And notice, prunes are dried plums. So a prune, a dried fruit, can actually potentially even be better than the fresh fruit sometimes. That's actually what the research shows. I could go into, I have a bunch of research on this on my YouTube channel, Health and Homestead. You can learn more about that. Nobody teaches this, but this is what the scientific studies reveal. I know people suggest otherwise, but they typically can't point to a study to back up their opinions. But then, notice, grapes and raisins lower it even more, and raisins are dried grapes. They're just as good as the grapes in that case. And blueberries are just amazing for helping avoid diabetes. So the idea that these are going to cause blood sugar issues is just not what the science actually shows. So the first point was fasting, then eating more whole fruits, then eat more whole grains. That could include whole wheat, bread, or oatmeal, or other well-cooked grains. And remember, about 6% of people don't do well with gluten. So if you are one of the 6%, avoid it. But about 94% of society does just fine with it. And so, but if you need to avoid it, avoid it. My wife, she doesn't do well with gluten. She's tried going off and on and off and on, and it always gives her trouble. And so I do great with gluten. So I eat bread all the time, and I'm enjoying my bread here in Switzerland quite a bit. And so actually, I eat tons of bread actually. But nevertheless, then the next point is to eat more whole vegetables. They don't have to be raw, you can eat some raw ones too, but you can eat cooked vegetables, that's fine. But we just mean not refined. Then, I'm going to talk more about this later, but avoiding spicy food if you have intestinal troubles can be very important, but we'll talk more about it. Then eating a handful of nuts a day. You don't really need any more generally than a handful, unless you get too thin, then you can add more in. It is wise if you just eat plants largely to have a B12 supplement, unless you're getting plenty in, foods that are fortified like, almond milk or some kind of milk that has additional B12 in it. But even meat eaters can become deficient in B12. Even these carnivores, some of these guys who just eat meat, they don't eat anything but meat. Some of these guys are coming down with B12 deficiencies. My grandfather ate meat his entire life, and he was B12 deficient. He had to get shots of B12 in his arm. As a meat eater, never stopped eating meat, and he was B12 deficient. So anybody could potentially become B12. The older we get, the harder it is for our intestines actually to uptake the B12 that we consume. So it's suggested for everybody over the age of 50 to take a B12 supplement. But I'm going to share with you what it changed in my life. When I went on this diet, it got rid of my achy joints. I had stopped running because I had achy joints. When I went on this diet, the achy joints went away, and I started running all the time because I had so much energy. It got rid of my migraines. It got rid of my headaches. It got rid of my hypoglycemia. I used to get blood sugar problems where I'd have blood sugar spikes and my blood sugar drops when I was eating this very high-fat diet. And then it got rid of my depression, the lack of energy. It gave me more energy, like I said, than I'd ever had before. Even more energy. I was 35 when I changed the diet significantly like this, and I had more energy at 35 than I did when I was 16 or 18 years old. It just boggled my mind how much energy a human could have. It was incredible. And it got rid of my gallbladder pain. You can actually reverse gallbladder issues with this diet. And got rid of my asthma and largely my allergies. I told you I'm really allergic to still cats and dogs. But other than that, I don't have like seasonal allergies anymore. And yes, I used to also get hangry. It's a new word in English, hangry. It's a mixture of hungry and anger. And I used to get the blood sugar issues, and I get hangry. And that's not a good thing, mind you. But as I went on this, these issues went away. It just changed my life. I want to jump forward. But a couple other points that can also help your intestines. This is quite interesting. Exercise in the gut. Multiple studies have revealed that exercise can increase the diversity and number of health-promoting bacteria in the gut. That's very interesting. So exercise is very important. And we were told this over 100 years ago in one of those books. Exercise aids the dyspeptic by giving the digestive organs a healthy tone, way before the research came out. But I want to close with this tonight. I'm going to share with you one of the most amazing things I've ever heard in my entire life. And I'm not using hyperbole. This is absolutely amazing. So this is what was called the Victor Valley Medium Community Correctional Facility in Adelanto, California. This is the longest name they could have thought of for a prison. And so there was a multimillionaire, he's still alive as far as I know, there's a multimillionaire Seventh-day Adventist businessman who, they call prisons in the United States correctional facilities. But they correct almost no one. Almost everybody comes out worse than they went when they went in. Not everybody, but most. And so this man, this multimillionaire, wanted to start a prison that would actually truly change people's lives. That was his goal. So he didn't need the money, but he got a contract with the state of California for a 500-inmate prison. The state of California said, okay, you can start a 500-inmate prison. We will fund it. And he said, okay, what we're going to do in this prison is we're going to separate the prison physically into two different sides. One side will be on a meat-based diet, where you have meat and vegetables and the other food. And the other side is going to be only plant food. And this is what happened. They allowed them to choose between a New Start program, it's a healthy lifestyle program, of a vegan diet, job training, Bible studies, and anger management classes. Now, when they told one of the government workers they were going to do this, the government worker said, no way, no way. These men would rather burn this place to the ground than go vegan. They'd rather burn the place down. And this, multimillionaire said, we'll give them the choice. They get to choose. We won't force them. And so that's what they did. Now, they told these men, they told them, this is what we're doing on this side, this is the other side. And guess what percentage of these men chose of their own volition, of their own will, to go on a vegan diet? It turns out 85% of these guys chose to go vegan. I can just imagine them like, yeah, I'm vegan. Okay, bro, you can do whatever you want, man, right? I'm not making fun of you. You can live, you be you, right? And so what ended up happening? There's a mathematical term in English called recidivism, and I'll explain what that is. Recidivism is a statistical measure of, for instance, if 100 people go into prison, and then when they get out, 60 of them commit another crime and go back to prison, that's a 60% recidivism rate. Simple, right? I'm just making up that number. But at the time that this prison was running, the recidivism rate, the repeat offense rate, was 95% in California. What that means is, in California, when somebody went to prison and got out, 95 out of 100 people that got out of prison commit another crime and had to go back to prison. That is insane. That's a terrible, terrible statistic. While this multimillionaire Adventist businessman named Terry Moreland was running this prison, the recidivism rate in his prison dropped from 95%, like the state average, down to 2%. 2%. That means 98% of the prisoners, after getting out of prison, never had to go back to prison. So it was a 10-year, but I'll tell you in a second. Check this out. So you know what they did? They decided, the other prisons in the state began to hear about this, and so they thought, man, maybe we could implement this, right? And other prisoners in other prisons around California were hearing about it, and they were asking, can I get transferred to that prison? Because they were hearing these amazing things that were happening. And so you know what the state of California did? They shut down this prison. They shut it down. Because it turns out that in America, prisons are big business. And if you want to run a successful business, one of the best ways to have a successful business is to have repeat customers. Right? I actually interviewed one of the men who started this prison. My wife and I went and interviewed him as we made documentaries. And basically, here's the thing. So what they did to shut it down, they said that the man who was running it, this multimillionaire, do you know the term collect calls? Do you know what that means? It means like you used to have like phones that you paid to call on. I mean, people didn't have cell phones. They didn't exist back then. And so what they did was they had these phones that you would pay, but these guys didn't have money to pay. So what you would do is you would make a call where the person who answers the phone has to pay for you. That's a collect call. And so what the government said is that the man who was running this prison was taking the money from the collect calls. But do you know what this multimillionaire was doing with the money that he was making? He was helping these people get houses when they got out of prison. He didn't need the money. He wasn't using the money, but they found a way to shut this prison down. They found a technicality, and they shut it down. Now, this could have literally revolutionized the United States of America, and then it would have spread to the planet. But instead, almost nobody knows about it. There used to be 2 videos on YouTube of actual interviews inside the prison where you could go and watch the people inside of there. Because in America, in the prisons, I'll tell you how it works normally. In prisons, it's super dangerous. You go to bed every night afraid that somebody may stab you to death. And the prisons divide up into the Mexicans. They divide up into the blacks and the whites and the Asians. You're looking for somebody to protect you. This is how they do it, and they go to bed afraid. But in this prison, you could watch the videos on YouTube where the guys in there, they're like, oh man, we're just all brothers in here. We're all brothers together. There's no racial distinction. Nobody cared about any of that. These men were happy. They were happy, and they had good relationships even with the prison guards, who normally you would hate when you're in prison. He was literally amazing. But sadly, those videos were taken down from YouTube. You can't go watch it anymore. But we used to watch it. We used to tell people, oh, here's where it is. We'll show you on your phone. You can go look at it. But they are no longer, sadly, there. But, so the question is, how long? So they ran this prison. They had a 10-year contract, but the government shut it down after 7 years. 7 years. So, and then I was told that later on they called him back up as it tanked and it did terrible. And then they thought, well, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And they asked him, hey, will you start it again? But he knew the government can just shut it down at any time, and he's a busy man, and sadly it never started back up again. But so who would have guessed that changing people's diets in part could change them from a life of crime to a life of becoming a good citizen? You know what? We were told this over 100 years ago in a book called Ministry of Healing. Listen to what it says. Wrong habits of eating and the use of unhealthful food are in no small degree responsible for the intemperance and crime and wretchedness that curse the world. This is exactly what we see here. It changed the lives. By the way, it not only changed the lives of the guys that were in the prison, it was changing their girlfriends and their wives at home. They were changing too. It was literally revolutionary to these people. And it's changed my life, and that's why I share these things. I'm not afraid to share these things. I would have been. No guy wants to live and teach this kind of stuff. Like, the cool diet is like the carnivore diet, right? But this changed my life. We see the people who live this way are some of the longest living people on planet Earth. And so, I'm not telling you what to do with any of this information. We're just simply looking at the research. We're looking at a little bit of history and the Bible. And but I also know, I've had people, we travel the world, I've had people come and tell me after coming to the seminar, implementing these things. We had one doctor who came to our seminar, was struggling with depression. And we were in his country, and then we went back to America, and then I think the next year we went to that country again. And this doctor wanted to be the one that would pick us up from the airport to bring us to our first location to speak. And he came to us, and he said, listen, I went to your seminar, I implemented what you said, and my depression has gone away. It's changed my life. We get to hear testimonies like this as we travel the world. I don't push anybody to do it, but it changed my life, and we get to see other people's lives changed also. And so, maybe some of the things you've learned here, and tomorrow night, as we look at the message on looking at a so-called health food that could make you angry, addicted, anxious, depressed, and potentially even ruin your marriage or relationships. We're going to look at that tomorrow night, because that's one other factor that we did not deal with tonight on the gut-brain connection. But before we close, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time to study history, science, and Scripture. Lord, there may be someone that struggled with depression that's struggling with it right now, just like I did in the past. And Lord, I believe you also want to set them free. So we pray for your strength. We pray that they would never give up, ever. That they would go forward. Because there is light if we open our lives to you. And sometimes even implement some of the things like the things we talked about last night. We thank you for your love. We pray that you would draw us all near to you. In Jesus' name, amen.